Cheers, Andy. Thanks very much. And for those that, Andy has introduced me. So I'm Tony Dolan, and I'm working in the Office of Environmental Monitoring and Surveillance. Always a bit of a mouthful, but we've got there. And my co-author, Brendan Wall, is also here today. But I also like to thank everyone else who has been involved in this chapter, particularly my colleagues in the EPA and the OEE side, the Noise Steering Group, who we meet on a regular basis, and they contribute a lot of the information and the data that I'm going to present here, and also obviously to the SOER team as well, who've did a lot of revisions, so thanks to everyone. So moving swiftly on, since I only have 15 minutes, I'm going to talk about what is environmental noise, strategic noise mapping, which is the core of environmental noise and particularly transport noise, talking about exposure to environmental noise and why we're interested in it, noise action plans, and finally the key messages. And hopefully when I've gone through the other areas, you kind of know what the key messages are anyway. You can work it out because we'll have covered it. So environmental noise, what is it? I suppose it's defined as unwanted or harmful outdoor sound. So it's areas like human activity, neighborhood noise, noisy neighbors, etc., industrial, commercial, entertainment, so your pubs, your nightclubs, etc., and transport noise. And the focus mainly of this presentation will be on transport noise. In relation to the EPA and local authorities, we get a lot of noise complaints. So the EPA, for instance, was responsible for issuing waste and industrial emission licenses, and they may include some noise conditions. Similarly, local authorities would get a lot of noise complaints coming from all of the areas that I've just talked about. So on the left, you can see the graph there. You can see it's dominated in terms of the local authorities with the number of complaints. So that's over a 4-year period. So the blue is local authorities, and above is the EPA. So in terms of trends, it kind of varies, to be honest about it, because obviously that was COVID as well. So generally, it's probably going up, but again, it really does depend on what's happening at the time. So what I mentioned is that the transport noise is kind of what the main focus. So the regulation behind that goes back to 2002, the Environmental Noise Directive, and that required member states to prepare and publish strategic noise maps and noise action plans for transport noise. So we cover roads, major roads greater than 3 million vehicle movements per annum, major rail, which is greater than 30,000 rail movements per annum, major airports was greater than 50,000 takeoffs and landings per annum, and then also for our 3 agglomerations, which is any urban area with a population of greater than 100,000. So that would be Dublin, Cork, and for the first time in round 4, we're on to the round 4 noise mapping, would include Limerick. So this has been going for guts of 20 years, so we're just coming to the end of round 4, and we're going to be moving into a new 4-year this time because of a new methodology. Normally it's 5 years. So what's the EPA's role in all of this? Well, our role is overseeing the implementation of the environmental noise regulations. So we provide advice and guidance, supervision, and we also try and report to make sure it's done on time, which is always a challenge because there's an awful lot of work involved. And then the other thing we try to do is we report to Europe because we have requirements to report to the European Environment Agency. Again, why are we interested? This is obviously all about environment and health. So we've obviously heard from our 2 colleagues there in terms of Aisling and Pat on the air. So again, with noise, it's probably a little bit behind there in terms of where it's at. There has been research, but it's probably a little bit behind. But I think we're getting more and more research, and some of the issues to do with health impacts of noise, particularly transport noise, include anxiety, dementia, depression, breast cancer, obesity. So that can vary depending on whether it's road transport, it could be a mixture of road and rail, it could be airport noise, etc. So it's an area, again, that people are interested in, and there are health impacts, and as I said, I'll come to it in a moment, but the WHO in 2018 generated environmental noise guidelines for the European Union, and in that they came up with noise levels above which noise impacts will start to occur. So that's for road, rail, airports. What does a map look like? As I said, this map is for Cork City, and it's the strategic noise map for Cork agglomeration, and it's for road noise, and it's for LDEN. So the DEN stands for day, evening, and night. So what is LDEN? It's a noise indicator. It's like an annual noise, average noise over the year, kind of. It also takes account of extra noise in the evening and night time. So the indicator is called LDEN. The noise maps themselves are broken down into 5 dB bands. So under the Environmental Noise Directive, which I mentioned earlier, we are required to start producing noise maps from 55 decibels and above. So generally the contours are in 5 dB bands. And as you can see from the map, obviously the stronger colours would represent the higher noise levels. The EPA map there, that link, if you go to that, there's a drop-down menu. You can sort of play around with the maps. There's a sort of legend on the left. You can sort of see your noise levels. You can look at the airport. You can look at roads. You can look at rail. You can look at LDN and LNight, etc. So there's a lot of good information there. There is also information on our website which tells you how to go through the different steps, because the first time you use it, it can be a little bit, unless you're familiar with maps, it can be a little bit challenging. But again, there's good information there. So if anyone's interested, I'd recommend having a look at our maps. The additional thing that we're doing for round 4, there's a new methodology. It's called the Common Noise Assessment Methodology, or CNOSS EU. So before this, everyone was kind of using their own methodology for road and rail and airports, etc. So the European Union came up with a Common Noise Assessment Methodology for round 4, which added a lot of extra work for us. So in order to try and sort of deal with that, the EPA and our consultant, we generated guidance to allow the noise mapping bodies and the action planning authorities to give them the information they needed to generate the information. So the noise map itself, it's all to do with data. So when you're looking at a noise map, what are the information? So if you're looking at roads, what do you throw into a noise model? Well, you're looking at the type of road, you're looking at the volume of traffic, you're looking at the traffic speed, you're looking at the gradient. So there's an awful lot of data that is collected by the local authorities and by Transport Infrastructure Ireland and by Irish Rail. That information then is put into a model, it runs in the cloud, massive computer usage required, huge amount of, and then it spits out your results. So that's where you saw the contours there, which I showed earlier. But the other thing we're looking at is obviously population exposure. So to have your noise levels is one thing and your 5 dB bands, but you also want to see particularly within the agglomerations and also outside along the major roads, what sort of population is exposed to which noise levels. So that's what we're looking at in round 4. And also harmful effects. So under the amended 2021 noise regulations, we're looking at areas about the number of people that are highly annoyed, highly sleep disturbed, and also where there's incidence of ischemic heart disease. So just to take you through some of the initial information there. So if you look at the map here, at the table here, you've got the 3 agglomerations, Cork, Dublin, and Limerick. What's different about the agglomerations, I talked about major roads, so that the mapping requires mapping of roads greater than 3 million vehicles per annum. But when we're looking at the agglomerations, Cork, Dublin and Limerick, we're also interested in all roads, because obviously if you're living beside a smaller road, there could still be a lot of traffic on that. So for Cork, Dublin and Limerick, we tried to map all the roads, so both the major roads and all the roads. I talked about the thresholds. So as I said, if you see in the first black, the total number of people exposed to noise above 55. So what we're trying to show is how many people in Dublin, Cork and Limerick are exposed to noise above the N threshold, which is 55 dB. And similarly, the 53 to 54. So 53 is the LDN. So what we're saying is under the WHO noise guidelines, what they're basically saying is anyone exposed to LDN values above 53 can potentially start to see health impacts start to occur. Obviously at higher noise levels and over longer term exposure, those health impacts can be more severe. So that's kind of what that's showing. And I suppose just to give you a heads up, because obviously I don't really have time to go into the detail, I suppose what the data is showing is that 41% of the population living in the 3 urban areas of Dublin, Cork and Limerick were exposed to noise levels above the N mandatory value of 55 dB LDN. And I think around 54% would be exposed to the WHO, so above the WHO, because obviously that's a lower noise level. So as we can see, and as I said, what's important about the WHO, it's just talking about, it's a guideline value, but it is sort of, it's an indicator, it's something you need to look at going forward. And in terms of the harmful effects, again, I'm focused on the 3 cities for the moment, but we have a lot of information as well for outside the agglomerations. But obviously, with time being of the essence, I'm just going to focus on these for the moment. So again, in terms of highly annoyed and highly sleep disturbed. So what's the preliminary data indicating? So it's basically saying that around 8% of the urban populations were highly annoyed based on their exposure to road traffic noise. That's the information we've got. And approximately 2% would be highly sleep disturbed. So that's for the 3 cities, Cork, Dublin and Limerick. Obviously the higher volumes or the higher population exposure is within Dublin, because obviously it's a bigger city. The next thing we talk about is noise action plans. So once you've generated your noise map, you then go, okay, what do we do with that information? So I suppose the local authorities take over at this stage. They're responsible for generating the noise action plans, which is no mean feat. There's an awful lot of work involved in that. So what are you trying to do? Well, you're looking at measures to prevent and reduce environmental noise, but you're also looking, so you're looking at your, I suppose, your noise hotspots or your priority important areas, but you're also looking to try and not make it worse. So if you have lower noise levels in parts of your urban areas, you don't want to divert all the traffic there. So, it's important to sort of be aware of that as well. So that means it is more tricky to try and, if you're dealing with your noise hotspots, so how do you do that, etc. So what we've focused on in round 4 is we've come up with an approach based on priority important areas. So there's guidance that we've generated which looks at, based on your results of the strategic noise mapping, so each local authority typically would be asked to generate 5 to 10 priority important areas, which is those areas that they're going to look at over the next 4 to 5 years. In Dublin, obviously, and Cork, it will probably be a lot more than that, but that's the focus. So it means that at least we have a more consistent approach, where before maybe it was a bit ad hoc in terms of local authorities' approaches. Just briefly, I'm going to talk about the airport. DPA doesn't have a significant role in relation to the airport, but what we do is, as I said, we oversee the noise action plans and the noise mapping. So Fingal County Council is responsible for developing the Dublin Airport Noise Action Plan. At the moment, they're out for public consultation. I think it finished yesterday. There was a 6-week public consultation, so obviously that was out. Just in terms of, you can see there the Cork Agglomeration Noise Action Plan. So that's just if you go on if the Cork City, if you wanted to have a look at the agglomeration noise action plan. And the one above is when I talked about the noise action plans and our plans for round 4. We've just also finished the round 3 noise action plan. So that was 2019 to 2023. And in each of those years, the local authorities were required to report on their progress. How are you getting on with your noise action plan? So they submitted a yearly report. We reviewed the report and we rated the performance. So as you can see from the map there, again, look, I'm not going to go into it in too much detail because we know there's a lot more work that we all need to do in this area. But I think there was, you can see there's an excellent for Limerick. Some of the Dublin and Kerry got a strong, and then there's quite a lot of moderate and limited. So that's what we're hoping to do with our approach for round 4 when we have this sort of more consistent approach with priority important areas. Obviously, I kept putting the plan in place is just one step, then the funding and dealing with the other organisations involved, like your TII, like your Irish Rail and DAA, they're obviously big factors as well. So in terms of what sort of, how do you deal with noise? How do you mitigate? How do you bring the levels down? So the driving policy is the EU Zero Pollution Action Plan, and it's looking for a 30% reduction across the EU to reduce the negative impacts of exposure to transport noise by 2030. So it's very ambitious. I don't think we're going to get there. But in Ireland, what are the sort of options we have? So in terms of noise management, what you're talking about better urban and transport planning, significant reductions in road traffic noise, reducing speed limits on Irish roads, low road surfaces, creating low emission zones. But also I think we need to piggyback on other strategies. Noise is obviously sometimes called the forgotten pollutant because it doesn't get the same focus as others. So probably we've closer links with air pollution. So obviously we saw some Pat's slide where you've got more people on public transport, get them out of their cars, get them onto the bikes, etc., walking. All of those are also going to be positive from an environmental noise perspective as well. So that's an important one. The other thing is national noise strategy. Obviously we've seen with the clean air strategy, and I think for air now to have a strategy. So hopefully in Ireland, it's something we've been talking about, that hopefully now that the clean air strategy is getting up and running, there might be a focus on looking for a national noise strategy, and I think that would be a positive development. And then again, as I said, in terms of what's happening at local authority level, in fairness, there's an awful lot happening. I just mentioned the Dublin City Development Plan. You might have heard in the news there's a lot going on in terms of trying to reduce traffic going through the city, trying to stop people going through the city if they're not actually stopping in Dublin City. So there's been a lot of work on that, but just on the diagrams there, you can see the coarse road surface, the low road noise surface, you can get maybe a 4 to 6 dB reduction. You have your noise barrier, which reflects the noise away from the residents on the far side of the barrier. And then you have your, I suppose, reduction in reducing the amount of road space, trying to get people onto their bikes, trying to get them cycling, etc. So finally, the key messages, which I know you know already, since we've just covered most of it already. So what are the 3 key messages? Environmental noise is the second biggest environmental cause of health problems in the EU after air pollution. And in Ireland, over 1 million people are likely to be exposed to noise levels above the mandatory reporting thresholds, and I think around 1.6 million are above the WHO guideline values. National policy for environmental noise is not as well advanced, as I mentioned, in other environmental areas. It is sort of the forgotten pollutant, so hopefully I think there is a need for a coordinated national policy and actions and planning and also linked obviously with health and transport, because as I said, we do need to piggyback on other strategies, but I think it is important as well that we have our own focus. And then I suppose a key one as well is that local authorities can't do this on their own, so it's really important that they link in with the other noise mapping bodies, including Transport Infrastructure Ireland, including Irish Rail, and the DAA as appropriate. And they also need to focus on implementation of noise action plans, and as I said, on those priority areas that we identified using strategic noise mapping. Thank you. Cheers.